We will now hear opening statements in the case of Samuel Rosenbaum versus Speedy Gonzalez, proprietor of Pizza Riva. Mr. Duck, you may proceed.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheist United Studios. Hey, Joey. Back in 2020, noted geography expert Donald J. Trump made headlines when he mispronounced the name of California's treasured national park, Yosemite, as Yosemite. Along with the social media mockery, like this tweet, as a black Jew, when someone says Yosemites, I'm quick to challah back. The flub brought renewed attention to an old debate. Is Yosemite Sam Jewish? Let's get to the bottom of this hot-button issue.
In Daffy Duck Esquire, a 2013 episode of Cartoon Network's The Looney Tunes show, Yosemite Sam is introduced in court as Samuel Rosenbaum. Maybe that's the end of the debate. Or is it?
Yeah, I think that depends on what you consider canon. I know a lot of people are sticklers for such things in the fandom world. And, for many Looney Tunes or Merry Melodies fans, looking at the old stuff where these characters were introduced, where it was Chuck Jones and Tex Avery and Friz Freleng and all those guys, Leon Schlesinger producing it, like that's Looney Tunes. And anything that's happened since then, even maybe like Looney Tunes Back in Action and Space Jam and stuff like that, isn't canonical. So if that's the case, then just throwing in that his name is Samuel Rosenbaum, a tongue-in-cheek reference maybe to this long-standing debate, is just that. It's kind of existing in an alternative reality or some other version of Looney Tunes and doesn't impact the nature of the character. Who knows? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, Looney Tunes was pretty ubiquitous, and I wasn't really, that aware of, all the characters in the show. I mean, I think maybe I kind of grew up in the golden era of cartoons. You mentioned Space Jam, and I think that was like the first time I was very aware of Looney Tunes and the characters therein. And, you bring up an interesting point. I mean, I went and looked for these episodes of the Looney Tunes show and saw a bunch of stuff that didn't even register for me as things that would be covered in the Looney Tunes show. Like Bugs Bunny purchases a pair of noise-canceling earbuds or gets addicted to a video game or something else like that. And I thought, wow, that's pretty bizarre, something in the early 2010s. To highlight this point, though, about the reveal around Samuel Rosenbaum, and I don't remember if there's a name for this when a show sort of reveals something that's maybe long been contested, but I also wonder, like, why in 2013 the people behind this show decided, oh, now's the time for us to come out and do this, I'd say a Jewish coded name, right?
Not even coded. That's about as Jewish as it gets for a name. I think what you're thinking of is like this retroactive continuity thing, retcon, right? That you kind of look back in the past and you change the past by giving Yosemite Sam this name. And then now maybe we look back and say, oh yeah, he's Jewish. Yosemite Sam was preceded in type, size, and hair color by the Red Hot Rider, Brooklyn's tiniest cowboy, in the 1944 short Buckaroo Bugs. Sam made his first appearance the following year in Hair Trigger. The short's writer, Michael Maltese, recalled how he arrived at the character's name, stating, quote, I was going to call him Texas Tiny, Wyoming Willie, Denver Dan. We were deliberately going for a location to make it Western, so I called him Yosemite Sam. I had never been to Yosemite, but Yosemite Sam sounded right. So there's two things here to your previous question, I think, or statement. One is that, like, the genetic heritage, so to speak, of Yosemite Sam is this Brooklyn cowboy, right? Brooklyn, kind of coded for Jew also. He comes west, he acts in very much the same way, the kind of temperamental and aggressive tiny Napoleon complex guy with red hair. And he's, again, like Brooklyn's tiniest cowboy, the Red Hot Rider. And then shortly thereafter, he kind of morphs into Yosemite Sam. So from at least a reception theory perspective, where I'm the viewer and I'm looking at it and I'm putting the pieces together, in my fantasy, Red Hot Rider sort of gets acclimated. He's no longer a Brooklynite. He's no longer urban. He's in the West for a year. He picks up cues and character traits or whatever. He's at least imitating what he's seeing, and he becomes Yosemite Sam. He grows a big mustache and all that sort of thing, but he's the same guy, right? So if that's the case, we've got a Brooklynite who moves west and becomes Yosemite Sam. I think that makes him pretty Jewish. But then we can look at like what's the paper evidence. The writer who sort of wrote the script for the first Yosemite Sam cartoon, Michael Maltese, he was just coming up with a clever name, and he had no compulsion, no sense of, I don't think he was Jewish. I know he wasn't. That this was going to be a coded Jew, and it just sounded nice. It's a euphonious name, Yosemite Sam, rolls off the tongue.
It's interesting. I mean, I watched that Buckaroo Bugs and Hair Trigger shortly thereafter, and man, I mean, Yosemite Sam is almost a shot-for-shot remake of Red Hot Rider. So yeah, it's kind of hard to deny that maybe he is just sort of an evolution of Red Hot Rider, a character that I was not aware of. I mean, he also became a criminal too. It never occurred to me until I watched Hair Trigger that he was a train robber, and I never even realized he was wearing that bandit mask all the time. I always figured he was just a foil for Bugs Bunny, a hapless city slicker as it was, like a not so great cowboy. But it never occurred to me that he started off on the wrong side of the law, which could also be, a Jewish guy trying to fit in the West, maybe.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that kind of overcompensating, right? Pretending to be a cowboy, if we take that kind of train of thought, that, the quickest way to become a Westerner is to rob trains and be an a-hole, And he does that quite well, although he is a bumbling fool, which sort of signals his, despite his appearance and despite his bluster, he really can't be a cowboy. He's really not good at being an outlaw.
One of Sam's possible Jewish traits is his voice, supplied by the man of 1,000 voices, Mel Blanc. Every character Blanc inhabited was an extension of himself, making them Jewish to an extent. Plus, Sam's appearance was based on red-haired, 5'4" Jewish animator and director Isidore Frizz Freeland.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible. I looked up today. I was curious because they always say Mel Blanc, I would say the most amusing Jew who's ever amused, in my opinion. That he's the man of 1,000 voices. I looked it up. I think he did 126 different Looney Tunes characters over the years, which is like most of them. And that includes all the ancillary and, one appearance, one-off sort of characters. But yeah, I mean, from a certain perspective, and this kind of gets into that realm of, like, is it us reading it as Jews because we're watching it as Jews? Or is Mel Blanc's own persona just so difficult to divorce from any of these characters that you could say, well, Tweety Bird and Elmer Fudd and everybody else, they're all Jewish too because they're Mel Blanc. I know, and that in that wonderful segment from the Flintstones cartoon where, of course, Mel Blanc voices Barney Rubble, they're speaking back and forth in Pig Latin, and Barney Rubble drops an oy vey.
Eddie Frey, when's the up case coming K? I couldn't iron fay an up K on eBay. Oy vey.
And that was very intentional. And I'm sure he's done that in other spots as well. I mean, he was Mr. Spacely on Jetsons, and he was Heathcliff the cat. He was like everywhere, Speaking of growing up with cartoons, like a good percentage of the voices that were in your ear growing up were his voice. And, he was also in the Jack Benny program, both on the radio and on TV, and unmistakably Jewish. I mean, does that mean that the character is Jewish? I don't know. The fact that also Yosemite Sam is based on the physical appearance a Friz Freleng that has, like you said, another layer of it. So you put a Jewish, physical body and you would give it Mel Blanc's voice. I don't know, that's like 100% Jew.
His voice is only one of Mel Blanc's 1,000 voices. It doesn't really sound very Jewish coded, but it's pretty Western and also pretty loud, neither of which excludes him from being Jewish.
This is really interesting. Part of my work is in the field of Western states Jewish history and trying to, educate the public about the heavy involvement of Jewish peddlers and merchants and even cattlemen, cowboys, as we might say, in the development of the pioneer West, like mid 19th century to the early 20th century. So there were like Yosemite Sam types, actually. There are photographs and, just a lot of evidence of these short European Jewish guys, some of whom came directly from Europe, some who spent some time in the East Coast and came west, sitting on horses, being cowboys. So, like, there is the real Jewish cowboy, and in a way, this is probably not what they were thinking because they were all New Yorkers making these cartoons. And they probably just thought this would be silly, to have this hot-headed little guy who was inept and had a Napoleon complex. And it works. I mean, Yosemite Sam is an endearing character. But in reality, like, in a way, it foreshadowed some of the academic work that's been done really since the 60s or late 60s even, trying to uncover this secret history, so to speak, of Jews who went west and actually did this kind of stuff. Were even bank robbers, like they actually fit or filled in all of those different cliched and stereotypical roles of prostitute and gambler and lawman and mayor and everything else in between, right? So in a way, if we look at it that way, this was like very ahead of its time. If it is true that Yosemite Sam is a coded Jew, I mean, the fact that he's loud, that almost suggests like urban verbal culture, like maybe that's one of the things that he couldn't shake off when he transformed from, Brooklyn's tiniest cowboy into, Yosemite Sam as we know him.
Probably pretty necessary out in the West too, being loud, Not a bad characteristic. You wouldn't want to be meek and quiet in the urban setting or in the, Wild West.
That's true. Although the cinematic cowboy stereotype is the stoic, quiet, man who speaks with action and not words and this sort of thing. So he does like go against type in some ways, being so just incredibly loud. I think Mel Blanc even said that that was the main characteristic that he gave to Yosemite Sam, that he was incredibly loud, and that anybody who was walking around the studio when he was voicing him, they would hear him like all the way across, the way, because it was the distinctive aspect. What I love though is when you watch like the Jack Benny show or listen to the radio program, and he gets really worked up, Mel Blanc, and he starts yelling. It sounds exactly like Yosemite Sam. So in a way, again, it's just Mel Blanc. It's just what Mel Blanc sounds like when he's yelling. So it's a Jewish urbanite yelling. That's what Yosemite Sam is.
Now, you dod-blasted ornery, no-account, long-eared varmint!
Hey, just a minute, you. Them's fighting words.
Yeah, them's fighting words.
I dashed you to step across this line.
I'm a-steppin'. I hate you.
Bugs Bunny's another interesting case in point. He's largely based on another Jew, Groucho Marx. And of course, Blanc did the voice for Bugs Bunny. And he said that that voice specifically was a mix of Brooklyn and Bronx accents. And the other thing about Bugs Bunny that I think is really fascinating is that he does, of course, these fluid transformations between different character types. That's one of his, strategies when he's dealing with someone like Yosemite Sam. He goes from cop to woman to taxi driver to soldier to old man, all in a blink of the eye, so to speak. But this can also be read as like a Jewish immigrant strategy. This has been noted by a number of scholars that specifically this idea that you can kind of be a chameleon and imitate, which I think, again, maybe that's what Yosemite Sam is doing, right? Imitating a Westerner when he's out west as a survival strategy. The European skin tone of these Jewish immigrants allowed them to kind of navigate the social margins and fill all these different roles. You see this a lot in like another Western. Actually, this is an interesting comparison. Whoopi, which is an Eddie Cantor film from 1930, where he's sort of a Nedish who's very much a hypochondriac and really ill-equipped to being in the West. But he survives by, being unfortunately in blackface, and then he becomes like a Greek chef, and then he becomes a woman, and he's basically Bugs Bunny. And I think Bugs Bunny is largely based on Eddie Cantor as well. But this idea of like the Jew who doesn't really fit in anywhere, so he tries to fit in everywhere. And we see this obviously in Zelig, also the mockumentary that Woody Allen made about the guy who not only like mingles with other types of people, but becomes them physically. So if he's hanging out with like, Chinese chefs, then he becomes Chinese, I mean, it's a pretty fascinating movie from a psychological perspective. This is a comment on the Jewish experience. But I just wonder if like any of that spills over into Yosemite Sam. If it's true, again, that he started out as the red hot writer and became Yosemite Sam, is he imitating a cowboy as a survival strategy?
Bugs Bunny is pretty much the star of the show, and I think all the Looney Tunes characters play a lot of different, characters and faces throughout the course of the show. So, yeah, I mean, it does seem like kind of a Jewish characteristic, and probably also what Yosemite Sam is doing.
Yeah, it's cool too to like think of it in terms of vaudeville, because Bugs Bunny is, because of his Groucho Marx, because of his Eddie Cantor, like all of this comes out of vaudeville, where being able to imitate different types was really your meal ticket. This was comedy in the early days. It was all racialized and so forth. So, being a stage Jew, a stage Irish, a stage German, a stage, Indian, whatever it might be, was like a staple in how those shows were put together. So, like, I would say that Bugs is the ultimate vaudevillian as well. And this is actually alluded to in a very interesting Bugs cartoon, A Hair Grows in Manhattan from 1947, which suggests that he was, born to immigrant parents in the Lower East Side and this sort of thing, which, I wish had more like Jewish content, but he just goes from, being a little bunny to basically being the Bugs Bunny that we know, like the very confident, very, almost indestructible rabbit, right? It's based on a title of a book called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith, which was, I think, a novel from 1943. But that's about like an Irish Austrian family, so that's not a Jewish reference necessarily. But again, to put him in Manhattan in the Lower East Side maybe suggests that Bugs Bunny is canonically Jewish. I don't know. But the fact is, like, he was shown in that episode to be like a born vaudevillian, that he was just a performer, a bunny of many talents, so to speak. And that's another aspect of this whole kind of cartoon universe, that it grows out of literally like the vaudeville world, which was not wholly but very largely Jewish also. And if you look at Yosemite Sam in that context, to me, he's kind of like the bumbling cowboy Jew of vaudeville, which was a type. There was a kind of as I alluded to, a tendency for actually Jewish performers to perform in Jew face, to basically make themselves an imitation of their parents or their grandparents, as sort of an assimilationist strategy to basically make fun of that old type. Like, this is what my parents look like, and this is how they talk with all this Yiddish, and we're going to make fun of it to show that we're not them, to basically prove that we're American. And one of the types that they did as a subtype of that was the cowboy Jew, who would go west, basically pretend to be a cowboy, but bumble his way through it and fail, and then like basically come back to New York with their heads hanging low and like admitting that, they wanted to be American, but they couldn't be that American. They couldn't actually be a Westerner. That was a bit too far, They tried to stretch it a little too far. And in a way, again, I think Yosemite Sam, because he is so inept, right? And that he's so like braggadocious and yet diminutive, like a lot of those Jews of that generation, like the Three Stooges, very similarly bumble their way through things. They couldn't beat up anybody else, so they beat up each other to show how macho they were, right? I mean, they were equally ill-equipped in their Westerns. When they went west, they couldn't really convincingly pull off the cowboy thing. In a way, that's what Yosemite Sam is, too. He's a Jewish cowboy wannabe who would be better off staying in Brooklyn or Manhattan or somewhere like that.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the Three Stooges, and I'm thinking about early slapstick, and yeah, very much so. Bugs Bunny kind of comes off as indestructible, and I think that trickles down to Yosemite Sam, who's also kind of violent, kind of brash. I mean, he's always fighting, and even though he gets blown up by dynamite, he survives. I don't know.
It's interesting, too, because some say that Bugs Bunny in particular, like while aspects of him are pretty Jewish, other aspects of him are more stereotypical, like violent Irish, stage type from vaudeville, where he is prone to like act out violently. And like you said, Yosemite Sam does that too, except he's not successful. Like he shoots guns, but he doesn't really know how. And he, tries to defeat Bugs, but always gets foiled. Whereas Bugs is like, somewhat like an indestructible, godlike personality who always prevails, no matter what situation. I mean, he does use the Jewish wits to kind of negotiate and trick people, but he's also like very physically imposing in his own way. And even like when he gets into the boxing position and so forth, there were a lot of Jewish boxers, but there were also a lot of Irish boxers. So, this is like to confuse the issue. Is he maybe Irish and not Jewish? That's another theory out there. I'm talking about Bugs Bunny.
You also said how Bugs Bunny was based on Groucho Marx, who was supposed to be a German stereotype, and Rosenbaum, although kind of Jewish, is also pretty German. But what you're talking about temperament, what about Sam's temperament? It perhaps seems more stereotypically Irish than Jewish?
Yeah, and I think also if this were, Amusing Irishman show, we might be talking about how he's like the quintessential leprechaun because again, he's this short guy. Although, his accent has disappeared because he's gone west. His Yiddish accent has disappeared as well. But he like presents physically as perhaps a little diminutive leprechaun with all this like trickster, nefarious behavior that is outside of the social norms. So in a way, maybe he is Irish. Again, same could be said for Bugs Bunny. Who knows? Well, Joey, what do you think? Is Yosemite Sam Jewish?
Well, to quote Sam, whoa. When I say whoa, I mean whoa. I don't know, maybe? Yeah, he's pretty Jewish seeming, but like I said, maybe he's just an amusing American. I think he's an amusing Jew, probably. What do you think, Jonathan?
I think he's an amusing Irish Jewish American cartoon character.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.